Hi. I wanted to talk today about something that old guys, old ladies talk about more than young people, and that is moral hygiene. Now, it's easier for an old person to be moral, especially in the sexual ways. We can all just go like this: shame, 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 shame on you if you go out and do sexual things that you might not ought to do even before you're married and so forth. And it's easy for us to make these judgments on people because we don't have the kind of libidos that we did when we were younger. So it becomes sort of like the purview of the elderly or the older folks to tell the younger folks that they ought to be more chaste in their behavior than what they had been previously. But this generation that we're currently experiencing in America right now may be the chastest of all generations that I think I've ever seen in perhaps the history of America. If you look at the statistics as they are right now, and people don't like to believe in statistics anymore because there seems to be a contradicting statistic for everything on the internet. But the teen pregnancy rate right now in high schools and people that are younger is at the lowest level that it's been in like since they started counting teen pregnancy rates on in the accurate level. And I know that we look back and we think about, well, people back in the 20s and the 30s and so forth, they were so holy and good and wholesome and everything, but in truth, they weren't. They were more or less secretly having sex behind everybody's backs, but it would show up in the fact that so many young women ended up pregnant somehow. And in those days, it wasn't really even fair for the women. The women were taking a big chance because there was a lot less of a institutional direction for a girl to go in those days whenever they got pregnant. And I don't want to speak too much about my own family, but I know that it occurred in my own family in the past, previous to my being born and all that. So what happened is they made those girls look like they had a scarlet letter on them. These days, there seems to be some kind of an understanding by the young folks that the act of sex leads to an economic decline for your future. And so what they do is well, for one thing, they teach birth control in the schools nowadays. So they use things like prophylactic rubbers and birth control pills, and they have the morning after pill, which is some people think is immoral. Matter of fact, many people think all these things are immoral, but they also think that having sex is immoral. So what is the reason that having sex was immoral? Was because it would lead to things like unwanted pregnancies. People who could not afford to put a decent home out for their children. And then, in those days, there was no positive way to prove paternity. So a man might go around and have sex with all these different women and impregnate a bunch of these women, and he could just skip away happily without ever taking any responsibility. And if she points her finger, he could run away to the other side of the country. Nowadays, they have laws that require a man to financially support their children, and they have tests, DNA tests, that give 100% positive proof, or it's 99.99% positive proof that the man was the father of that child. So it's a different day in many ways morally. And so what we're seeing as a result of this is a very chaste generation, the Xers, or what they call themselves. They are very chaste in their behaviors, at least as a result. Now, there's a bunch of different reasons, of course, and one is, of course, birth control. Another one is that they can get an abortion still if they have an accident happen like that. Another one is that they seem to have more alternative sex habits, which I don't want to get too detailed about, but there's oral sex and other things like that that are more predominant now than they were in the past. And it seems, and I'm not positive of this, but it seems like there is a lot more of the homosexuality occurring in the society today as well. So, we as older folks can look down on this generation. We just want to, I guess. I think where the morals are failing in this generation, I believe, it may be in the it's something to do with the return to this racist nationalism that we have today. And I know that a few people, many people maybe don't buy into the whole thing, but there are too many people right now who they are not being kind to each other in the daily basis. There's, of course, the current president is about the rudest, crudest, nastiest politician that has ever lived. He spouted out all sorts of racist comments throughout his entire presidency, and it's being tolerated. He was elected. It's hard to believe that such a racist person as that would be elected as the president of the United States, but it has happened. And if you go around, you talk to people, I think racism is on the increase. It's being institutionalized. And one of the things that's doing this, of course, is the internet. What we're doing, right now, if you're on the internet. The internet has been able to codify and compartmentalize the racist groups, so that it used to be there'd be a racist over here and a racist over there and a racist over there, and maybe you might meet up with each other and talk with each other, but it would be like you would have to kind of like be very careful about your speech if you were in a group of people, because you don't know which ones are going to automatically come out and say you racist, and then it might cost you socially or even in your job. But nowadays, there's a certain anonymity that's involved in the internet that you can go in there, and I'm sure even things like child pornography or other types of pedophilia can be done through the darknet, they say. I don't know anything about the darknet very much. I'm not that savvy, but it's easy even in the regular internet to find Nazi websites and racist websites and Ku Klux Klan websites. I don't know what to tell you. If you're a person who is a racist, who believes that the black people of the world or the Jewish people of the world are somehow different or inferior, or that we have to somehow stop associating with them and stop mating with them and all that kind of stuff. If you're in that way of thinking, I mean, here's the problem. I'm going to give you the big picture on this. If you don't get along with your fellow man in this day and age, it isn't like in the old days where we could just have a war. If we light a fuse and start a war in this day and age, it could be the very end of the human race, and that's not just an idle threat. Matter of fact, I'm of the sad opinion that, the Murphy's Law and all that, anything that can go wrong will go wrong. It's the second law of thermodynamics. All systems tend to run into their maximum level of disarray. Well, what that means is that now that we do have the ability with nuclear bombs and missiles, the giant nuclear hydrogen bombs, they have gigantic ones that Russia has, and the delivery systems that they have nowadays, that if one country in some place in the world, or one group who has nuclear bombs someplace in the world, feels that they are being defeated in a standard military operation, what they may do is launch a nuclear attack against their enemies. And then their enemies, maybe it's the United States or whoever, has an automatic retaliation that they're going to get. And before you know it, there could be 1,000 nuclear bombs at play. You think that can't happen? It will happen. It not just can happen, it's inevitable that it will happen. That's why we have to be extra special careful about dealing kindly with each other in this world today, because once the rhetoric gets too hot and the people of the world become too much divided against each other, the inevitable conclusion is the end of the human race as we know it. And there may be, a handful of people left, possibly. I mean, there's movies about this, but chances are the 99% of the population could be eradicated through nuclear winter and radiation and just explosions of the bombs and everything else. There are easily enough weapons in the world today to destroy mankind. So that's where the morals have to be. That's where we have to understand morality. We have to learn to we have no other choice but to try to be more kind to each other. This hatred that's being fostered by the President of the United States and by the Muslims in the Middle East and so many other people who believe that their way is the only way and their race is the only good race, and that all the other races are inferior. Well, all the other races are human beings, and they have intelligence enough to be able to destroy you, and then you're going to turn around and destroy them. That's why we need to be moral. We need to try to be kind to each other, because, I mean, it makes you wonder, well, maybe it's not such a bad thing if the human race is destroyed. Well, that's an immoral viewpoint. We have to be kinder to each other throughout the rest of the history of the world. And I'm kind of sort of surprised that we haven't killed ourselves already, So, thank you.